the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you
we're back.
can do for your country.
Welcome back, Taylor,
Welcome back, Fars.
on this chilly, cold Wednesday in Oakland.
It's true. No, it shouldn't be too bad.
I'm pretty. So wait. So how long are you there for? A day?
Just a day. Yeah. Like
That's
one
quick.
night. Yeah.
Took a little turnaround.
Yeah, it's on my list of things of like I have like so many like cities on my weather app. I'm looking at it now because like everywhere everyone I know lives. Oh my God. My brother lives in Spokane. It's 7 right now. We got Baltimore snowing, Austin 25, wind chill advisory, and 3 more advisories.
Yeah.
Hard
It's
freeze.
gonna be. It's
Oh, but
gonna
then
be
on Thursday it's
rough
gonna be 67
60. Wait, where?
in Austin.
Wait, when?
Thursday.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, yeah. I'll
Yeah,
take it.
so you're gonna get through it.
All right. So it's only a few days. We got to bunker down.
Yeah.
Good.
Good. Great.
So we are on to your story today, and per usual, I'm gonna go ahead and do an introduction. We're doomed to fail. We are gonna have a fun podcast today about a topic that I'm gonna guess that Taylor's giving me clues for, which I don't know because we don't share each other's details before we record the podcast.
Sure.
I'll stop talking like that. Can you give me a clue?
It's a continuation of a series that I guess I started earlier this year.
Volcanoes.
No, we finished Volcanoes. We're done. We printed out that diploma.
Oh yeah, that's right. And we released the omnibus.
Yeah.
The continuation of something you started. I don't know.
The fire.
Oh, wait, the fire?
Yeah, it's a fire.
Okay, sweet. Which fire?
The one in Chicago.
The Great Chicago Fire.
The Great Chicago Fire. Yes, I also want to say, so we're going to talk about the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. And I also wanted to say Chicago, like that, like Chicago. And Lindsay, my cousin Lindsay, that's what your mom sounds like. Lindsay's mom is like, I'm from Chicago. It's great. She's the best.
I love it. I love that.
Yeah.
I love Midwestern accent.
Me too. They're so cute. So yeah, the Great Chicago Fire. We talked about the Great Fire of London in 1666. So let's talk about the Great Chicago Fire. My friend Agnes emailed and was like, "You're gonna do that, right?" And I'm like, "Yes." Like, obviously, I grew up in Chicago, so my Chicago friends were like, "Let's do it." So okay, you ready?
I'm in. Let's do it.
Did you ever read The Jungle when you were in school, Fars, by Upton Sinclair?
You're going to be shocked to know that I did not, but I am
Okay.
very, very familiar with it.
What are you familiar with about it?
The horrid meat.
Yeah. But you know what it is actually was supposed to be about?
The Chicago
Was
Fire?
No, about the people. Like it wasn't written to be a think piece about how gross the meat packing industry was, but that just happened to be something that they brought up and people took that. But it was really about the people. And I read it and I I know that it was about, he mentions how disgusting all of the meat plants were. It actually led to the U.S. Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. So it actually had like impact across the country, which is great. That should be safe and clean. But it's also a story about people, and it's so devastating. So it's all these immigrants coming to Chicago, and they're having like such a hard time finding a place to live, finding a place to work. They're getting screwed over everywhere. Like their houses is gets mortgaged if they miss a payment, or even if they don't miss a payment, someone else can move in. They just like have terrible employment. There's one time where a terrible thing happens where a baby falls into a puddle and dies. So sad. There's like so many human stories in it too. One of them about like the guy meets a rich person in Chicago and the rich person gives him $100 bill, but he can't get anyone to make change on it, and he's afraid he like ends up losing it. It's just like so devastating. It's such a devastating human story. But I had that in my mind when I was thinking about this because Chicago is such a rapidly growing city in this time, and it is one of the biggest cities in America, even a couple of years later. So the Chicago Fire is also the name of their soccer team. Isn't that funny and
Bad.
weird?
It's bad. Bad.
Yeah. And a TV show, obviously, Chicago Fire, the like a drama show. Okay, I know I mentioned Tacoma FD a bunch on our socials because I just love that show so much and I'm thinking about fires. But they always make fun of other shows. And at one point they're watching a show that it's like Pittsburgh FD is in, or Pitt, yeah, Pittsburgh FD is the name of the show, but then they're filming it in Seattle, and it's Pittsburgh FD Seattle, which like makes you laugh so hard. Like it's not like Seattle FD, it's Pittsburgh FD Seattle. You know what I mean? So Chicago is a huge city now. It was a huge city then. So it's 1871, and Chicago has been growing like crazy. In 1840, the population of Chicago was 4,470. In 1870, so just 30 years later, it's almost 300,000. So it's grown from like 5,000 people to 300,000 people in 30 years. So it's huge. By 1880, so after the fire, it's still going to grow. It's going to be 500,000 people. So it's still going to grow kind of forever. It's obviously a great connector city. There's tons of trains now and then, and it's cold as shit, but it's beautiful, and a lot of people live there. So, do you remember where the Great Chicago Fire started?
In a bakery.
Nope, that was the other one.
Then I do
Um,
not know.
it started in Mrs. O'Leary's barn. That's like the
Oh,
myth that like the cow kicked over the lantern, and that started the Great Chicago Fire. So there's a song that was released in 1896 called "There'll Be a Hot Time in the Old Town Tonight," and it goes. Late one night, when we were all in bed, old Mother Leary left a lantern in the shed, and when the cow kicked it over, she winked her eye and said, "There'll be a hot time in the old town tonight." But she wasn't old, she was only 44. But still, it
I mean,
did
back
start,
then,
yeah, it did start in and around their barn in Chicago. They live like a little bit, they live on the the southern side of the city. So Catherine and Patrick O'Leary were immigrants from Ireland. They moved to Chicago and they had a couple of side hustles. So when they talk about Patrick O'Leary in the book I read a book called The Great Chicago Fire and listened to some podcasts that I'll share. But they always call Patrick O'Leary an unskilled laborer, like an unskilled worker. Like those are the jobs that he had. And I'm like, how learn a skill? What? How can he be unskilled forever? But whatever. That he just had like shit jobs the whole time. And Mrs. O'Leary had a cow and some other animals, and she would deliver milk to her neighbors. So she had a barn where she had some animals, and she was like a milk lady. They owned their home, the barn, and a house on their property that they rented out to other Irish immigrants. So they were like working poor. So here are the facts. It's Sunday, October 7th, 1871. The O'Learys live at 137 West DeCoven Street. It was dry as fuck. It was the hottest October on record and the driest summer they'd ever had, which is exactly what happened in London, if you remember. Super dry. And it was still warm. Everything was made of wood, obviously, because everything was still made of wood then. There was a strong wind, exactly what happened in London. And Mrs. O'Leary had just gotten 2 tons of hay delivered to her barn. So the barn's full of dry hay.
handling.
Yeah, exactly. The people in the back house are having a party. They're probably smoking cigarettes, whatever. They have candles, like all is happening kind of on the property. The week has been very, very fiery. So it is, 200 years after the Great Fire of London, but fire trucks are, still very similar. They don't have like it's still kind of the same way that they're going to try to fight this fire. And there's so many fires still because people still rely on fire so much. So, like I said before, we're super lucky that we don't have to rely on fire constantly. But the firefighters are exhausted. So the day before, there was a fire at a lumber yard that caught on fire, and guess what it was next to that caught on fire after?
A cotton factory.
It's like it's so ridiculous like you couldn't make it up. It's a cardboard box factory.
Not good.
It sounds like it happened in a cartoon, like, oh, my cardboard box factory is on fire now.
That was literally a Simpsons episode.
Yeah. So sometime in the evening, around 8 o'clock, the O'Leary barn caught fire. A neighbor, his name was Daniel O'Sullivan. He was 26. He only had one leg. He had a wooden leg, which would make me even more afraid of fire than I don't know, that seems scary. But he like kind of like hobbled over, started yelling. Everybody's like, "Holy shit, there's a fire!" They try to get it out. They try to get the animals out. They get one calf out, but the cow dies and the horses die, and the carriage that they have is destroyed. The O'Learys were in bed when it happened. So one of the myths is like the cow kicked over the lantern while she was milking the cow, but she was like, "Why would I ever be milking my cow in the middle of the night. That doesn't make any sense. Like she was asleep. She had to wake up really early to milk the cow. So however it happened, fire got into the barn and the barn like it was engulfed in flames really, really quickly. It could have been the people at the fire or at the party or people from, an ember from the wind just like blowing around and like catching the barn on fire. What is kind of fun is that their house did not burn down. So like the whole city of Chicago pretty much burnt down, but in the other direction.
That was
So
very
Larry's
lucky.
house was still there. Yeah. So now the fire's starting to get crazy, and they're like, okay, we need to tell someone, we need to alert someone. And so we talked about last time that there were like brigades and volunteers and watchmen. So this time, there's a little bit more technology. So there's watchmen in towers around the city watching for fires. And also, local businessmen and business owners have keys to a call box that they can call the fire station. So, like, if you own the store on the block, you're going to have the key to open up the box to call the fire department. Like you're the only one who has it, but like it exists to be able to do that. So Daniel O'Sullivan went to like a local store and tried to get the guy to call, and the guy didn't do it. He said, "No, I'm not going to call. It's not a big deal. The firemen are really tired." So he like didn't make the call. But finally, someone did see it. A dude named Matthias Schaefer was on one of the towers, and he saw it, and he sent the fire trucks to the wrong place because he couldn't really tell where it was from where he was. So they ended up going about a mile away. So it took them a while to get to where the fire was. Make sense?
Yeah. Oh, these are horse-drawn fire trucks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. And so, have you ever heard the term like a three-alarm fire?
Yeah, I heard it in the context of chili.
Do you know what that means? Oh, like spicy food, like three-alarm chili.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I would assume it's based on the severity of something.
It is, yeah, and it's based on literally ringing a bell. So if you saw a fire, you'd ring it once if it wasn't that big of a deal, twice if it was getting pretty bad, and three times if it was really bad. So a
Just
three-alarm
ring it
fire
three
was
times. Just always ring it three times. Like,
100%. I totally agree. But they didn't ring it three times from the beginning for this one because they didn't think it was like that big of a deal because there were fires all of the time. So by the time the firemen get there, it's about 10 o'clock. So about 2 hours have gone by and it's already spreading a ton. Also, obviously, because of the like crazy, everything's dry and it's really windy. So it's already starting to spread. So a couple things that happen in Chicago that are kind of sad and I thought interesting kind of side notes is one of them is this is only 6 years after Lincoln was assassinated. And one thing that I know about him is that he left Springfield the day like that he was going to DC to become president. And he was like, I love Illinois. I can't wait to come back. And he never went back. Like, it wasn't easy to travel, obviously. And like Lincoln had planned after he was done with his second term to go back to Illinois to check out the West, maybe go to Europe. He never really went anywhere, you know?
kind
He
of
just like
sad.
he was poor and then he was president. So sad. And so he, he had all those plans. He's been dead for 6 years. But you know who was in Chicago during the Great Chicago Fire? You gotta
John
guess.
Wilkes Booth.
No, I don't know where he was, but Mary Todd Lincoln, that poor fucking woman, his wife.
Oh, jeez.
She had just lost, they had four sons. Three of them died. Two of them died in childhood. One died while they were in the White House. Her third son, Tad, had died just a couple days before. Or a couple months before. So she was like mourning her third son. He died when he was 18 and just like so sad. And then of course she's there during this like panic. Like she was fine. She wasn't affected, but like mentally, I'm sure she's like, what the fuck? Why do I deserve this? Super
Yeah.
crazy. And also a lot of people in Chicago were people who knew Lincoln really well. Like they knew him as a person and they were like lawyers with him on the circuit and like he was big in Illinois. So the fire also destroyed a lot of personal papers of Lincoln's, of letters, of like historical things that would have been really cool to have, but the fire destroyed them, which is a bummer.
That sucks.
Another thing that happened on the same day is actually the deadliest fire in American history happened in Wisconsin. It's the Peshtigo fire, Peshtigo. That one killed 2,400 people. And that's the deadliest fire in American history. And it happened the exact same day as the Chicago fire. It started with a slash and burn, kind of getting out of control because they're trying to control fire and ended up destroying a city and killing a ton of people. But it's the same wind and the same dry climate. So like it makes sense that other fires happen this day as well, you know?
Wait, where is it? What state?
In Wisconsin, in
Hmm.
Peshtigo, Wisconsin,
Okay. Not
like a
good.
little bit north. Yeah. So here's what happens in Chicago. The rich people are, of course, running away with their most expensive things. So they're trying to get away. A lot of like paintings and books and things are destroyed. Some of them bury things in their yard. One guy buried an entire piano in his yard, just like hoping for the best. So they would like bury their silver, bury their jewels, and then like run. Hopefully that would save it. I don't know exactly what happened to all the stuff that was buried, but one person said that when he came back, it was still so hot for like a really long time that he tried to dig up his stuff, and as soon as his stuff hit the oxygen, it burst into flames. 'Cause that's how hot it was, you know? So like a lot of it is like they couldn't even go back into the city for like at least a week because it was just like so hot. So a bunch of people try to bring their things to the Chicago Historical Society, but they're like, it's too crowded in here. We have too much stuff. So they're like closing the doors and don't let people bring their things to that. The rich people were also being saved by their friends. So they could like, walk to a different part of town and stay with friends. At some point, there are rich neighborhoods that think that they're not going to get the fire. They think that they're safe. And one man says, like, his family's packing. He's like, don't pack. We're safe. He's like, let's make breakfast for as many people as we can make breakfast for because we know people are going to be hungry in the morning. And so, like, the servants were like panically cooking, but they ended up getting consumed by the fire anyway. Like, they lost their house too. It happened so fast. Um, Another thing that rich people could do is they could leave. So now I never have cash. I use my credit card all the time. I can use it all over the world. But in this time, what you would do is if I had, a house in like a lake town in Chicago, I would have a bank account there, you know?
Okay.
And that bank would have money in it. So they could go and like get money out of the bank in other parts of like around Lake Michigan. So people were able to do that. The poor people, of course, were just running with their stuff. Some people after it was over said that the poor were better off because they had less to lose. And you're like, no, that,
That's not how that works.
that's not how that works. No. Um, they ended up in refugee camps. People got smallpox. Like it's very sad. Like, it was very, if you lost everything, you lost everything. There are reports of, obviously, and this is something that like I was reading this right after the London fire, and in the London fire, how they were like, oh, only like 6 people died. But in the Chicago fire, like people remember hearing like mothers crying because they can't find their children. Like, of course that happened in London,
Yeah.
Like, of course that happened in all these ancient fires. Carts were being filled and toppled over. Of course, there was looting. Like one guy was running and he saw a guy wearing his clothes because the guy had like looted his house and he was like, fuck it, better than have it burned. So,
Yeah.
so people ran all the way to Lake Michigan. So Lake Michigan is cold even when it's hot. Have you ever been in Lake Michigan?
I've never been in it, but I've been around it enough to be like, that is a terrifyingly huge body of water. Like
Yes.
it has the same gravitas of an ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's freezing. It's freezing all year long. But people were running to Lake Michigan and they ran waist deep into the water. Just like remember this year in Hawaii when people were running into the ocean?
Yeah.
It was just like that. And it was loud. The fire was like roaring and people were running and like standing in the ocean. Some standing in the ocean, stood in the ocean for hours. And it was like freezing and they were just like watching the city burn with like fire flying above them. The jail was, everybody in jail was let go. The mayor wrote a note and it said, release all prisoners from jail at once, keeping them in custody if possible. And like they let everybody go for like petty crimes immediately. And then they took the rest of them like with them and almost all of them just got away and just were like
Yeah.
in the wind. But they're like, we're not gonna let you burn to death here. So
Yeah, of
just
course.
just go. Um, and so they had hoped that the fire would be um, stopped by the rivers because there's tons of rivers in Chicago, but they weren't. And it was because of the wind. And the shoreline, of course, had all the lumber yards and things like that because they needed to have access to the boats and all the things. So the shoreline was very, very combustible.
Wait,
So,
so I'm looking at this map
mhm,
and it looks like the fire would have jumped two rivers.
yes, it did.
And you're saying the reason I was going to ask about that. You're saying the reason that happened was because there were lumber boats there?
Yes. Not
Okay.
like yeah, like lumber yards are on the shores of the rivers, and then it's so windy. Like the wind like just blows like embers and burning things across the river. So where they thought they might be able to stop it, it was not able to. So I was actually around well, the first river that it jumped was around midnight. So around midnight, the flaming debris blew across the river and landed on the roof of the South Side Gas Works. So that like exploded, you know.
Yeah.
and that caused it to continue to spread out to the south side. The mayor was Roswell B. Mason. It was his only term as mayor, but he did a bunch of calls for other cities to help, and they did. Other cities sent their fire trucks. They were able to like get the word out, but it didn't really help. They were connecting to the waterworks. So there was like a general waterworks that they could connect to, but the water, it was so hot, the water would just turn to steam when it came out of the hoses. It just like didn't do anything. So because of the wind, there were also fire whirls, like tornadoes of fire going through the city. And that ended up hitting the roof of the waterworks. So the waterworks caught on fire and all of the pumps went dry. So at some point, a little bit after midnight, they couldn't even pretend to use their hoses for water anymore. It didn't work.
This map is also really interesting because it shows where the fire started. It literally
Hmm.
just consumed everything above it.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
And
no,
so
everything below it is like totally fine.
it's fine, including the O'Leary's house. Um, so after seeing the damage, the fire marshal, after the waterworks exploded and was gone, the fire marshal said, I gave up all hopes of being able to save much of anything. They really couldn't do anything. A couple people did try to do those like fire breaks, and one of them, a man named James Hildreth, was an alderman who had the idea to blow up buildings with gunpowder to try to stop it and create those like
Yeah.
fire breaks. Um, he did a couple. I don't think it was ever like super successful. He got into an argument with a Civil War hero named Philip Sheridan, and who was chopping buildings down with axes. And so they kind of like there's a little bit of back and forth. Like, I want to be in charge of doing this. I want to be in charge of doing this. And so there, it doesn't. No one really was able to make that fire break. Um, it moved north across the lake. There was a big like melee on the Randolph Street Bridge because that's where people were trying to like run across and run out of the city. A lot of stuff was like happening as people tried to leave. But luckily the wind died down because like we said before, these things just have to end. Like you can't like douse it with water. So on October 9th, it started to rain and the fire slowly went out. The last house that the fire claimed was owned by a man named John A. Huck. So poor guy. His house
Yeah.
was the last one to go. All in all, about $222 million in damage, which is one third of the total city's value at the time. 2,000 lampposts, 17,500 buildings, 120 miles of sidewalks, 73 miles of road, and officially about 300 people died, but probably more.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure there's
Yeah,
because I would assume at that time, like it's hard to keep tabs on people anyways. You
yeah,
know,
exactly,
this is not
exactly.
like
People,
IDs and whatever. Like it's probably not as prevalent.
yeah, if you like lose your family, you like lose your family. You don't know where they are, like
Right.
where things are. So the mayor put the U.S. Army general in charge and put the city under martial law for 2 weeks to make sure that people weren't looting and weren't like hurting each other. There were roving police special units, citizen volunteers, just trying to make sure there wasn't any lawlessness. There was deadly force was allowed if someone like didn't comply. So it was kind of crazy there for a while afterwards. Tons of aid came from all over the world. So people were giving money from everywhere. FDR's dad gave $5,000, and a bunch of cities and individuals helped. The money was managed by a charity that like wasn't great. It didn't. It was one of those charities that was like, oh, we don't need to give the poor that much because they're always poor. You're like, no, like you should help everyone. But it was eventually managed and doled out. And then they started to rebuild, and they rebuilt better, like what happened before. And now that started a lot of what we see in Chicago with like the terracotta buildings, obviously skyscrapers. The first skyscrapers were there. There was someone who was like, let's make an 11-story building because we're going to make like the skeleton out of steel. And people were like, no, that's crazy. You could never do that. So they had the opportunity then to do the beginnings of these things. And then by the 1890s, they have that World's Fair. So things are pretty much rebuilt, pretty quickly there. Um, Mrs. O'Leary was never charged with anything. They did like bring her to court, and she was like, I was not in the barn. I would not have been milking my cow. I didn't do it. I didn't start it. Some people have like a theory that like a meteorite hit and like hit Chicago, and that's what happened, or whatever. But it was like all those conditions to have a terrible fire that we talk about. They were all
Is
there.
it? Isn't it almost like not then for those people, but like kind of now? Wasn't it like kind of like the best thing that could have happened to Chicago was the whole thing fucking burned to the ground and then they rebuilt it.
I know. It feels, yeah, yeah. I mean, I kind of think like yes, like for these cities, especially when you're at like the cusp of the Industrial Revolution, where like you can start building things out of steel, and you don't have to tear people's houses down because they're already down.
Yeah,
Sure, and it obviously like, Chicago, it continued to grow. Um, the place where the O'Leary's barn is in 1956, the Chicago Fire Academy was built on that site, and it's still there today. So Chicago firefighters are trained on the spot that the Chicago fire started in
that's so
school.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it.
I'm gonna look up the site of the O'Leary's farm. Oh
Of
man,
Chicago,
they should
Chicago.
they should have kept the barn.
I know. I'm sure it's just like, um, I don't know, melted away by
Well,
now. Chicago Fire Academy,
um,
it's about soccer. Not soccer.
yeah, I was gonna ask about that. I was going through the Chicago Fire FC's face Wikipedia page and was like, how has nobody said anything about this?
I
Like,
totally agree. No, I totally agree. Like that, it seems ill. Like,
it's like in like 200 years they call like a baseball team the 9/11 New
exactly.
Yorkers. Like it's like
Exactly.
little insensitive. But I guess so much time has passed that maybe they don't care.
Yeah, I know, but I know that's funny that like, after this much time, it can be something that's like funny and like ubiquitous with the word Chicago when you're like, I don't know.
Maybe we don't need it ubiquitous.
Yeah,
Um, man, there's so many of these. There's so many like horrible, horrible vibes. Like,
I know. And a lot of them, I mean, a lot of them are like the similar things. Like you just have those like things are bad and especially in these older cities. So I read a Stephen King book a long time ago called Cell. It was about cell phones. Like, well, something happened and like cell phones happened and there's like magic in it and like whatever all stuff happens. But like in his intro, he's like, I wrote this story thinking, could a modern city burn? Like, could a modern Boston burn down the way that like these things did? And it kind of has to be like tons of chaos and that people have to like be in on it. It was like his answer, and it was, magical and mystical and all those things. But I don't know if like that could like happen these days as much as like you can destroy it with like bombing. Obviously, we see that all the time, but like our cities aren't really like made of wood in this way.
I don't know because I remember living in Los Angeles and it was like, do you remember Taylor that one day we were driving to work and there was that huge
Oh yeah. The
building, the
building.
apartment. Yeah, it was that huge
Hmm.
apartment complex that was mid construction and somebody torched it and you're just driving down and you're like, what? Like that was incredible. I
But
Well,
also it didn't spread.
it's true. It didn't spread, but it didn't spread because I think it was in the heart of downtown. But at the
Yeah.
same time, you look at like Malibu, for example, where they'll have wildfires, and you
Yeah.
know it'll be like Pepperdine is the only thing that was saved because they create all these breaks and stuff, and like
Hmm.
they planned for a wildfire to happen there, which is like,
Hmm.
do you remember that where they were like telling their students not to go home and not to leave because they could get caught in the wildfire and they were safer there? I so would have left. I
I
so been
mean
like,
but that's how you die. You die when you like try to run away.
I
Like in your
know.
car. Oh, no, you're right. Because you're right. But I was thinking like big city like Chicago, there's full skyscrapers. I feel like no. But a smaller city, especially in California, with all of our wildfires, definitely.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
Cool. Lots of fun ways to die this week.
You got clouds, you got fires. Let's see what we
Oh
can
my
cover
God.
next week.
Unbelievable.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that, Taylor. I hope at some point we can get to the San Francisco fire because I think if I recall correctly, that also was an earthquake. It was literally just like hell opening up on Earth, and
I think it was all connected. I think it was at 1904 earthquake turned to the fire, but I will get to that for sure. I did actually, so I just am finishing up my 2 weeks off, but I prepped at least read books for three other episodes that I'm excited about, so I feel a little bit ahead.
fun.
Yeah.
Sweet. Cool. Well, if there's nothing else, we can go ahead and wrap again per usual. Please do write to us at doomtofailpod@gmail.com. Find us on socials. We love to hear from people. And we're doing a little bit of a later release this week than usual, given some issues that have arisen.
Fine. Everything's fine. A little
Everything's
bad.
fine. Nobody's
Um,
mad.
Cool. Well, thank you. Yeah, doomtofellpod@gmail.com. Doomtofellpod at everything. Please tell your friends. Please review us on Apple Podcasts. We really would love to have more people listen. And we're trying our best to hustle. If you're a podcast promoter or know someone who is, let us know. We need help.
We need some help.
It would be great.
So awesome. Well, thank you,
Cool.
Taylor. We'll go ahead and cut things off there.